My name is Bruk. I came to Boca Raton with my wife in 1979 and got involved with the Boca Raton Synagogue a few years later.
I'm going to ask you all those questions about that. Thank you so much, Dr. Bruk, for joining us here today. My name is Sandy Altner. I'm a volunteer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum, and we are in the beautiful television studios at Lynn University in Boca. And today is December 16th, 2016. Let's start with how it is that you and your wife, Ravella, were able to come to Boca Raton. What was the reason for that?
Well, I came to the University of Miami and Jackson Memorial Hospital in 1976 as a visiting professor for 1 year, which became 3 years, and that was roughly 40 years ago, and came to Boca Raton in 1979 to join the anesthesia staff at the Boca Raton Regional Hospital.
Now, you started off where?
In the States.
No, where did you come to the United States from?
Well, I'd visited the States several times, but I came to Jackson Memorial and in 1976. Basically, it was going to be for 1 year. 1 year became 3 years, and then I came into practice in Boca Raton.
But you were from South Africa?
From South Africa, from Cape Town.
Okay. You and your wife, did you meet in Cape Town or did you meet in the United States?
No, we met in Cape Town and had our family over there. We have 4 children, and when we arrived, the oldest was 12 and the youngest was 4.
So when you did your 3 years that turned into, well, there was supposed to have been 1 year and it turned into 3 years, why was that? What was appealing to you about being here in Florida?
You know, that's a difficult question. When one really came with an open mind as to whether we were going to immigrate from South Africa or not. And once the opportunity arose to remain permanently, I remained at the teaching hospital in Miami for a total of 3 years, and then was offered a position with the anesthesia department at Boca Community, or Boca Regional as it's now called.
How long had you been a doctor prior to coming to the United States?
I graduated in 1956, came in 1976, so that's 20 years.
What kind of medical community did you find when you first arrived in Boca Raton to take that job as an anesthesiologist?
I found it quite interesting in that all the people on staff that I met were basically very well trained, very competent, and it was really quite a pleasure working with them.
Now, this was at the Boca Raton Hospital, was
Yeah.
it? Do you know, can you tell us a little bit about what that hospital was like in 1976, because it hadn't been around for a very long time at that point?
Well, that's just shortly after I arrived in Boca in 1979, and shortly after I arrived, they opened up all the floors of the hospital, and it's always been a very well funded, very well supported, and basically a very well run hospital.
Was it different to other communities that you've worked in?
Well, yes and no. I've worked around the world a bit. I spent the major part of my early years in Cape Town, but I did work in Israel at Hadassah, and I had worked in a mission hospital in the northern part of South Africa, and then Jackson Memorial, and following that Boca Regional, and it was sort of an interesting progression from a very, very, very well organized teaching setup at the University of Cape Town, where the medical school is about 150 years old now, and going through the mission hospital experience, which is a little different, and coming first then to a very major county type hospital in the States, which was the teaching hospital, and then going completely differently to a very well-run private institution. And they're all very, very significantly different.
Did you experience, I don't mean to just be so abrupt into jumping into this, but we have had people talk to us about anti-Semitism and so on, and sometimes people have experienced that here. Did you experience that at all within the confines of the hospital?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, it was very interesting in that it was just a non-existent phenomenon.
Right from the
get-go.
Right from the get-go. Now, when you moved here in 1979 to Boca Raton with Ravella, what kind of Jewish community did you find here?
Well, it was quite interesting. We were the 72nd family to join the Conservative Temple. At that time, Bethel had, I think, 375 families.
Bethel being the
Reformed
Temple,
yeah.
And the Conservative Temple was which?
B'nai Torah. And then essentially coming from South Africa, where the Jewish community is really a very conservative one, probably 90% are Orthodox affiliated, 10% Reform affiliated, Reform being closer to conservatism here than Reform here. And we found that B'nai Torah didn't quite match our needs, so we decided to go to Anshe Emunah, which was an Orthodox synagogue in Del Rey. And I always tell my friends that when we got there, seeing as how I had a very young family, we managed to bring the average age down to 90. But it didn't suit our needs at all. And then we felt we really wanted a more traditional experience for our children. And my wife and I had a long discussion about this, and the decision was either we were going to start our own synagogue or we were going to move where there was an established community. So we went for the former, and here we are. 33 years later.
How many years later?
33.
33 years that Boca Raton Synagogue has existed. Now, what? So were you in the conservative? Were you conservative when you were in Cape Town, or were you Orthodox?
No, Orthodox.
You were Orthodox.
Yeah.
And so there was no Orthodox community that was suitable for you and your family at that time, so you started the Boca Raton.
Well, in Boca Raton, no.
Yes, in Boca Raton. So you would have to travel to go to a synagogue, and that wouldn't have
Well,
been...
the nearest was, I think, Fort Lauderdale, and that didn't make any sense at all.
So how did you go about starting a synagogue?
That's a good question. Well, when we went to Anshe Emunah for the high holidays, which was the start of our membership over there, we met up with a fellow, Neville Ziff, who was from England, and we ended up sitting next to each other. And when we came out from after Rosh Hashanah, we had a long chat, and after Yom Kippur, I turned around to him and said, Neville, don't you think we should start our own shul? And he said, yeah, excellent idea. So we looked around, and sure enough, we found a fellow, Albert Nawi, who was from Baghdad. So here you had a triumvirate, one from South Africa, one from London, one from Baghdad. And we then thought it would be a good idea to start a synagogue. And in no time, we bumped into people casually and found that they were all interested. In no time, we had, I think, 9 people who were interested. So, not knowing any better, we went ahead with the project.
So did you first meet in people's homes? Where did you meet?
Initially we met in my home, but it was quite interesting in that when we then advertised in the Jewish press that we were going to start a synagogue. Anybody who was interested should come to my home on a particular Sunday evening. And we had about 55 people show up, and of them about 8 or 9 were truly interested. So we made contact with the Shiva University, and one of the rabbis from down south in Miami, whom I'd met, said he would come up and join us for services. And the first services actually held were held in Neville Ziv's home, and it was on Hanukkah, the first day of Hanukkah, which was the first day of December 1963. And from there onwards, we grew very rapidly in numbers, and then there were the usual fights and foibles and what have you. And
1963?
Sorry, what am I talking about? 1983.
1983. Your first services then were at Mr. Ziff's home.
The first services held were in his home, and then we were having services at my home, and we found that we had quite a few people who were getting interested, and we then started using the day school as it was then, I think, on 4th or 5th Street. And then we graduated to my home and somebody else's home, and this was around about the beginning of the middle of '84, and we all of a sudden realized that if we were going to go anywhere, we had to have a permanent spot for services, and we had to have a permanent home if we were going to attract any sizable community. And by then we were 11 families, and of whom about 6 were financially viable. And Neville Ziff and I took a compass and a map of Boca Raton, put the point on the corner of Jog and Palmetto, and drew a circle of a mile around that. And then we went for a walk, and we got onto Montoya Circle and came across this lovely piece of land, and which we subsequently found wasn't for sale. It belonged to, what are their names? They did Century Village. Anyhow, they owned the thing, but the piece of land, and eventually we bought a piece. We thought it was that, and when the architect came along, he said, "No, that's not your land, that's your land." So we found out where we really were.
So there was no Orthodox community in that area at all until you came with the plans to make the synagogue.
Yeah.
And then you forever changed Montoya Circle.
Absolutely.
How so? Tell me about what it is today.
Well, today, the community is about 850 families, and it's far and away the most active of all the communities, all denominations actually. They have something like 6 lectures a day. They have a kollel, so that anybody who wishes to study can just walk into the synagogue, sit down at a table, and a young rabbi will come and join him and start discussing things, learning, etc. And we have, what we also did, which was quite smart, was the Sephardic. We had quite a few Sephardic members, and they were interested in forming their own synagogue. And I then went and sat down with the 2 prime movers, and I said, this doesn't make any sense. We're all Jews. We all do roughly the same thing. Why split it, and why weaken both yourselves and ourselves? And they said, why don't you start with, say, 1 service on Friday night a month, 1 Saturday morning service a month, and then see how it goes. And now we have our 2 main rabbis for the main congregation. The Sephardic sections must be about 70 to 90 families, and they have a rabbi who's a Sephardic rabbi. Then we have several other rabbis, one who's entirely devoted to outreach. And then we have, we're fortunate enough to have a rabbi entirely devoted to the youth. And then we have several retired rabbis who ran big congregations in the past, and they've done unbelievable service in promoting educational programs and whatever. And so it's been very interesting.
It's not just the Boca Raton Synagogue, but it's also having created a community at Montoya Circle.
Yes.
Tell me how that developed.
What's also interesting, we also now have a satellite synagogue, which is in the school on the west side of, off Glades Road, just short of the 441. And we've also are fortunate enough to have had a splinter community, which is Young Israel, which are around the corner from us.
Right. So Young Israel originated from Boca Raton Synagogue and split off
Yeah.
because it was closer geographically for people?
No, I think it was a question of um, o- o- of of really different way of davening.
Okay.
And and you know what? Whenever you have a synagogue, you've got to have one you go to and one you don't go to, so that fulfill that premise. Montoya Circle. You know, once one bought the land, one knew that that was where the synagogue was going to be, and you started finding people moving into the area, and then we decided that to get going, you had to have a permanent structure which people could relate to. So we put up the first part of the building, which is now the school and the offices and what have you. And that we did in 1984, going into the early part of 85. And that gave it a tremendous boost. And then, you know, when we put this first part of the first building up, we sort of we did all the drainage, all the sewage for a major construction up front. And then more and more people started moving into the neighborhood, and we built the synagogue, and with it the mikveh and all the, you know, the things that are important to people. And with it, the congregation grew significantly. Of the 850 families, I would say about half live on the circle, perhaps a bit more, and the rest, like myself, drive and park next door to the synagogue, and that's essentially it. And so Montoya Circle's become like the main magnet for especially the more orthodox of the community. A lot of the people are essentially traditional and prefer the orthodox way of davening and what goes with the educational facilities. And
Boca Raton is such an interesting place, Dr. Bruk, because we have so many different ways of observing Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
So within the Jewish population, there are people who are
spectrum.
non-observant. There are Jews for Jesus here. There are Orthodox Jews or Reform Jews.
The
There's
spectrum
Chabad.
is as wide as you can get it.
In developing the Boca Raton Synagogue, what was it that those initial families decided they wanted most? What were the key elements that were important to this group of founders?
You know, the original group really were essentially from South Africa, England, and a couple of Sephardim originally from Baghdad. And we were all used to a very traditional form of Judaism. And why I use that word specifically is because none of us were really that observant. You know, we kept, all of us were at kosher homes and things like that. But, you know, in terms of a very sort of rigid orthodoxy, it wasn't quite what we were used to. Because orthodoxy, like in England and South Africa, especially in those days, veered to what I would call conservadox over here, and people were very traditional, moderately observant, but not, you know, grossly so. As the people came in, I think the community became more polarized and more orthodox than we were perhaps used to originally. But, you know, one grows along with the flow.
So, for example, in terms of what distinguishes this from some other forms of Judaism practiced in South Florida, particularly in Boca Raton, do the men sit with the women, for example?
No. Okay. We have separate seating, which is, you know, with the mechitza, which is the hallmark of an Orthodox synagogue. And, you know, the range goes all the way from Reconstructionist through Reform, through Conservative, through to Orthodoxy, and then of course since we've been here, you've got 3 Hasidic shuls now, and
Is that the Chabad? You mean?
Chabad, yeah, and Chabad is probably not as traditional as we are. They tend to be much more accepting of, you know, of things which wouldn't be quite acceptable in an Orthodox structure. You see, what was also interesting is that the whole tenor of observance, even at the Reform and Conservative level, I think has become more observant since the advent of Orthodoxy in the area. For instance, the dietary laws were never observed when we first came to Boca Raton, and we brought the first kosher caterer to Boca from New York, and I'll never forget the first federation function that we were involved with, and we were quite involved with the founding of the federation in the early days, etc., etc., etc. And they had a function at one of the major hotels, and they said they couldn't organize a kosher catering in due course, but it would be kosher style. And so we came along and walked in to the function, and the first thing we saw, was an enormous platter of veal birds with veal wrapped in bacon. Oh. I took one look at this and I said, "Oh, yeah, nice little Jewish boy like me." Went off, got a hold of Bruce Warshall, and what was her name? She was the president of Federation at the time. I'll think of her name in a minute. And I gave them hell. So I said, "Don't worry, for the people who want fish, there's fish." So we go down to look at the fish, and there they had a big platter of shrimp. So, it didn't quite go down too well. And once we got our first rabbi, the Federation started having initially some kosher catering, and now of course it's totally kosher catered for all functions. So it's sort of interesting to see the changes.
Absolutely. And when we think about just starting a synagogue, obviously that takes volunteerism, it takes money, it takes a will to see it succeed. Did you have all of that in place right from the get-go?
Unfortunately, the one thing we didn't have was a good psychiatrist, because anybody in his right mind wouldn't have embarked on it. But, people really were they really gave of themselves, they gave of their money, and they gave their time. I mean, I was the first president, and we used to have many of our meetings starting at 10 o'clock at night, because I was on call and had to get through my work at hospital before we could start. And, you'd have a meeting from 10 to 12 or whatever. But it really was very interesting, very exciting.
And it sounds like there was a tremendous commitment in the community to see this succeed.
There really was, actually. And then we were fortunate. Our first full-time rabbi was Rabbi Dratch, and he was a very energetic young guy. And things really started happening once Rabbi Brander came to town. Before that, we had Winiars, who was a fascinating guy, brilliant speaker, brilliant scholar, totally immoral, and rather interesting.
What do you mean totally immoral?
In any way you can think. He was brilliant. And at the moment he's a lecturer at Oxford, and interesting guy. Anyhow, having said that, then Brander came, and he was tremendous energy, tremendous ability to relate to people, excellent politician, and I think he was largely responsible for a tremendous boost in the membership. I think we went from about 100 families to, I don't know, 300, 350 families while I was there, 400 possibly. And then Rabbi Goldberg has been a tremendous success, lovely guy, and we've been very fortunate. The second rabbi is a lovely person, very bright. That was Rabbi Faust. He started the movement of the Aliyah movement to Israel, Nefesh B'Nefesh, and he managed to fund it, arrange for funding, etc., etc. And I think they've had something like 4,000 or 5,000 people make Aliyah to Israel under this organization. He lives in Israel, and the fellow who's our second rabbi now is a delightful guy, Moskowitz. Then we were very fortunate. The Sephardic rabbi is a very interesting guy. He's got his MD, and he's a physician who became a rabbi. And he's really very, very, very good, very bright. And then we have our outreach rabbis who've done a stunning job.
When you look at how Boca Raton has changed over the years, I asked you about the hospital environment, but I didn't ask you whether, as a wider community, you felt that there was any resistance to Jews being here. Did you experience any anti-Semitism?
I never experienced that, and it was quite interesting, because when I came, the first doctor I went to see, as courtesy, was Jack Alley, who's, I think, just celebrated his 92nd birthday. And I went over to him, we were talking, and I said, there aren't very many Jewish guys at the hospital, and I think I'm the second or third one there. He says, "So what?" He says, "I'm Episcopalian or something." He says, "Doesn't matter. You do your stuff as you should be, and you and I will be big friends, and you'll get all my support." And we stayed friends all through the years. Even now, we still see each other from time to time.
That's wonderful. When you look at the Jewish community today, and particularly how attractive Boca Raton has become as a place to go, to set up home, it's changed.
For all sections of the community, in actual fact. It's a very big magnet for the Orthodox community. And
much more so, in fact. It's the fastest rising numbers we're seeing in the Orthodox community in all of the people who are moving here. Why is it that Orthodox Jews want to be in Boca Raton?
Well, because all the facilities are there, ranging from high schools through middle schools, through junior schools, all very high quality education. And now they have a yeshiva as well, and you've got to have one of those. And so they feel very comfortable with the interaction of their kids with other children who are brought up in a similar way. So that's a very big attraction. There's a mikveh, which is a big attraction. There are all the study groups which go on all the time, and the formal lectures, which are, you can go there any night of the week, and you can go to 3 different lectures, or you can go there any time during the day, and you'll probably hit 1 or 2 or 3 regular lectures. And this appeals to particularly the Orthodox section. Chabad is very interesting in that it caters to people who would like to be Orthodox but are not, but feel comfortable in the semi-Orthodox environment. And also the demands on the average man in the street is not as great as, for instance, we join one of the other temples or a synagogue like ours, where you have to commit yourself financially to whatever goes. Even though people who don't have the wherewithal, there's no questions asked, and
they will come.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
when you look at the many changes over the years, of what in the growth of this community, the growth of your synagogue, are you most proud?
Its existence, I think. As we said before, there's the whole range of observance in the town. And the fact that the Orthodox can observe their style of religion, it's available. And the fact that it's available, I think that's important. You know, the other thing that's interesting is we have an outreach program with one fully dedicated rabbi to it. And we have a Friday night and Saturday night explanatory minion in the library. And if you go, you'll just see one little notice outside the door and says, when you have derived as much benefit as you can from this service, please join any congregation, be it Orthodox, Conservative or Reform. And I think that's terribly important. And on the Yontavim, we can only cope with 300 people in this explanatory minion. And it's booked out way in advance. They don't pay any dues, they don't do anything, they come. And it's a conduit, as it were, into the community. It's a conduit into the Jewish society, if you were to put it in inverted commas. And I think that that's terribly important. That's one of the very important things in the synagogue. The other thing that's very interesting is that of the 850 members, I would say less than half, much less than half, have an Orthodox background. There are many people who have drifted into Orthodoxy for whatever reason, perhaps because it fulfills some, social or other function. And so that's very interesting. I'm sort of a bit lapsed. I don't tend to go to very many lectures or anything like that. But I still sit at home a couple of hours a day and read things of Judaic interest, because that's an interest of mine.
Of course.
And but it certainly provides a tremendous outlet for Orthodox younger people who make up the bulk of the congregation.
So it's gone from that first congregation where you went, where you were the youngest family there, to now a very vibrant young community in the Orthodox community.
So. I think there are 1,300 or 1,700 children in the community. They tend to have but a few more children than most. And it's sort of interesting to see all the, there's an A-roof, so they can push their push chairs and carry goods and things and bits and pieces. And it really is interesting to see these young professionals and entrepreneurs who are so involved, and yet their background would be totally different. I think we've got 94 physicians in the congregation, and it's sort of, that's an interesting number, I think.
When we look at the changes from 1983, when the Boca Raton Synagogue first began, to and to serve a population that had no Orthodox community in Boca Raton. How many Orthodox synagogues do we have today in Boca?
In Boca, well, 3 Chabad, which you have to classify as such. Then there's our synagogue, which has satellite just off the 441. There's Young Israel, which is quite a vibrant community too, about 120 families. Then you have several minyanim scattered around the area, like there's one in the hall of the development at the start of the community, sort of a Montoya Circle. There's another one in Boca del Mar, and but as a total of Orthodox actual communities, there are 5.
A big difference from when you first arrived.
Yes.
Yes.
But the whole town has actually changed in many, many ways. And, the city itself has been most helpful. Like, we have a tremendous amount of security at our synagogue, every service, every day. And the reason was that we once met with the sheriff and the mayor of the town. They said, look, if there is going to be any incident, the chances are that your synagogue would be hit, because it's the biggest Orthodox synagogue, and as such, it sort of sticks out. And the sheriff every Saturday will have a car at the entrance and one at the exit of Montoya Circle. We have three sheriff's deputies or security people from a security agency on duty every service. We have two former Marines who are on the staff of the shul, and they are around all the time.
So the sheriff, the participation of the sheriffs is not it's not security that you have to pay for. It's been provided by the community.
Most of it's we also have our paid security, but the sheriff's been very good that way.
I have one last question for you. When you think about being new in Boca Raton, and with Ravella and your young family and your desire to have a proper Jewish background for them, a proper Orthodox background for them, did you ultimately find that the education that they were able to get did meet what you and Ravella had dreamed of?
Not quite. You know, when we first came to the States, my kids all went to the Hebrew Day School, Hillel, in North Miami Beach, where we lived for 4 years actually. And when we came up here, there was no day school for them. So they all went to Boca Academy, as it was at the time. And they were going to classes with the rabbi of the time, you know, in the afternoon, a couple of days a week. My daughter, who was the youngest, went to the first class of the day school, which was in its infancy. Well, first grade was actually in that school, and which is now not Hillel, but the other day school in town. This is the precursor of it. And there was certain interesting experiences along the way. You know, there was a time when there were 2-day schools, as there are now, both of them doing terribly badly, and it looked as if they were both going to founder. And I called a meeting at my home, and with the Orthodox crowd from what is now Hillel, and you know, the other people who were very involved with the, you know, the Solomon Schechter equivalent. And the suggestion was have 1-day school in the way that we had in South Africa. We used to have, I mean, 85–90% of kids graduated from school from the Hebrew day schools. But each Hebrew day school, like the one my kids went to, had 3 channels of Hebrew. And from the very Orthodox down to a much more lax form of Hebrew, and or it's really Judaic studies, if I could put it that way. But it meant that all the children in town were going to the same school, even though their channels of Judaic studies varied.
Well, now, was that federation, or was that?
No, that was in South Africa.
Oh, okay, all right.
So I suggested that the 2 schools amalgamate and have the same sort of thing, where you had 2 different channels of Judaic studies. People wouldn't touch it. Oh. The Orthodox were totally against it because it would sort of contaminate their kids. The others weren't so happy because that meant they'd have these Orthodox kids, and if they came to their houses, they'd have to have kosher stuff for them. And it was sort of mind-boggling. And both of them almost found it, and they were prepared to let it go that way. And then, of course, it turned the corner, and today you've got 2 very, very successful streams of education in this town, and probably better than in most parts of this country, in actual fact.
Which makes it another reason to be attractive.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
very
Right.
much so.
Are you happy that you stayed here?
Oh, yes. I love Boca Raton. I really do. You know, I always say it was much moving from South Africa to North Miami Beach was quite easy, surprisingly so. Moving from North Miami Beach to Boca was like coming home. It was really, it's been a wonderful place to live. I love the place. And
does it feel like a Jewish community to you?
Yes. You know, you can walk into any supermarket in town and you can find just about any kosher product you could think of, really. You know, you go to Winn-Dixie, you can, you know, get anything you like. Go to Publix, the same. And, you know, it's really a great place to live. And it's a great place to live the way you wish to live. And everything is there to allow you to live the way you want to and be accepted for the way you want to live. And it's, which makes it very different from many parts of the world.
That's very true. Very true. Dr. Bruk, thank you so very much for joining us. And it's so nice to have a chance to meet with you and to hear your stories. Thank you.
And